"Is there space in your bed? I just need a place to sleep tonight," the Apache girl told Blacksmith. Smoke rose from chimneys, carrying the smell of cooking fires into the cool evening air. Birds chirped their final songs before night, and the clatter of carts on the dirt road had begun to fade. In the center of the town, the blacksmith's workshop glowed with light. The orange sparks from the forge leapt into the air with every strike of hammer on metal. The rhythmic pounding echoed through the empty streets. He worked late, as he often did, repairing wagons, shoeing horses, and fixing tools for the townspeople. His hands were large and calloused, his arms strong from years of swinging the heavy hammer. Sweat ran down his face, but he did not notice it. He was lost in the rhythm of work that had become his life. As he bent over a horseshoe, shaping it with precision, a soft noise reached his ears. At first he thought it was the wind, rustling the wooden boards of the shop. But then he heard it again, faint, uncertain footsteps on the dirt outside. He straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. The forge's light spilled onto the ground, casting long shadows. In that glow he saw her. A young girl, no older than 16, standing at the edge of the yard. Her clothes were worn and patched in many places. Her hair was tangled, streaked with dust, and her small boots were caked with mud. She looked exhausted, her eyes wide and alert, scanning the area as if she had come a long way and was unsure if she would be safe. The blacksmith frowned. He had seen many travelers, but there was something about her that was different. She carried herself with a quiet dignity, despite her fatigue. She did not call out, she did not beg, but she stood there, shivering slightly in the evening chill. The blacksmith stepped closer to the door, peering at her. "Can I help you?" he called, trying to sound calm, though his heart thumped a little faster. She hesitated, then stepped forward, keeping her voice low and steady. "Is there space in your bed? I just need a place to sleep tonight." The words were simple, almost ordinary, but the blacksmith felt a shock run through him. She spoke to him directly, without fear, yet there was no arrogance in her tone, only desperation. He blinked and rubbed his eyes. "A bed?" he asked, unsure if he had heard correctly. "You mean inside my house?" she nodded. "I do not have anywhere else, please, just tonight." Her eyes met his, and he saw something he could not ignore: fear, exhaustion, a trust he did not feel he deserved. The blacksmith hesitated. Memories of warnings from neighbors and rumors of conflict with the nearby Apache communities flickered in his mind. Some people in the town would never allow an Apache child inside their home. Some might even think her presence dangerous. He took a deep breath. He was tired. He was alone. He had spent most of his life keeping to himself, working long hours, talking only when needed, but something about her made him pause. She was not threatening. She was simply a girl seeking shelter. After a moment, he stepped fully into the doorway, gesturing toward the small yard. "Come in," he said quietly, "but keep your distance from the fire." Her face brightened slightly, though she did not smile. She nodded and stepped cautiously into the light. Her boots crunched on the dirt floor, and she flinched slightly at the heat of the forge. The blacksmith guided her toward a corner of the house. It was small, with a single bed and a straw-filled mattress. There were no sheets, only a thin blanket folded neatly at the foot. It was hardly luxurious, but it was warm and it was safe. "Here," he said, indicating the bed. "You can rest here tonight." She looked around the room, then down at the floor. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was soft, almost afraid it might be wrong to speak. She lowered herself onto the bed carefully, as if it were a fragile thing. The blacksmith watched her, unsure if he should leave her alone or stay near. She closed her eyes but did not sleep immediately. Her chest rose and fell with shallow, uneven breaths. She was still tense, still alert to every sound. The blacksmith went back to the forge, trying to concentrate on the glowing iron in his hands, but his mind kept wandering. He thought about her journey. How far had she traveled? What had she seen? He realized he knew nothing about her except that she needed shelter. And yet he felt a strange pull of responsibility, a desire to protect her even though they were strangers. Hours passed, and the town grew quieter. The wind rustled through the trees, and the blacksmith finally heard her soft, steady breathing. She had fallen asleep. He paused by the bed, watching her, noticing the dirt smudges on her cheeks, the way her hands rested lightly on the blanket. For a moment, he remembered the stories his mother used to tell him about kindness, about helping those who cannot help themselves. He had never thought of himself as a generous man, but tonight, he felt the warmth of compassion stir in his chest. The next morning, he brought her a simple breakfast: bread, cheese, and a cup of warm milk. She ate quietly, her hands small and careful. He did not ask too many questions, not wanting to scare her, but he did speak gently. "Where are you from?" he asked. She paused, her eyes downcast. "Far," she said simply. "I do not have anywhere to go." The blacksmith nodded slowly, understanding more than she might have expected. Sometimes words were not enough to describe a life of hardship. She had fled danger, uncertainty, and the harshness of the outside world. He could see the courage it took for her to approach a stranger and ask for shelter. Over the next hours, she helped around the workshop, gathering water, sweeping the floor, and watching him work. She did not speak much, but she observed everything carefully. The blacksmith found himself talking to her in small ways, asking her opinion on the tools, commenting on her careful work, telling stories of his own childhood in the town. He realized that despite the silence, a bond was forming between them. It was built on trust, not words. That evening, when the sun sank behind the hills again, he felt a strange sense of fulfillment. The little workshop, once lonely and quiet, now held the presence of another life. The girl, once weary and anxious, had found a small refuge. And he, the blacksmith, had found something he did not know he had been missing: the quiet joy of helping another human being, of giving safety when it was needed most. As night fell and the girl drifted into sleep, the blacksmith returned to the forge one last time. He worked until the fire dimmed, his hammer striking with less urgency, more thoughtfulness. He realized that kindness was not always easy, but it left a mark that lasted longer than fear or suspicion. Tonight, in the small corner of a frontier town, a young girl had found a place to rest, and a blacksmith had discovered the power of compassion. The sparks flew once more, lighting the room in brief, brilliant flashes. And outside, the world continued its quiet rhythm, unaware of the small act of humanity that had unfolded in the little workshop. The morning light filtered gently through the small windows of the blacksmith's workshop, casting long, soft beams across the wooden floor. The air smelled of smoke and iron, mixed with the faint aroma of baked bread that still lingered from breakfast. The girl stirred in the small bed in the corner, blinking at the sunlight as it fell across her face. Her dark eyes, wide and cautious, reflected both hope and fear, a strange mixture that seemed to follow her wherever she went. She slowly pushed herself up, rubbing her arms as if to chase away the lingering chill of the night. The blacksmith was already awake, moving around the workshop with careful, practiced motions. He poured water into a small basin, then rinsed the floor of the previous day's soot and dirt. He had learned to work in the quiet hours of the morning, when the town was still, when the rhythm of his hammering could flow without interruption. But today, the sound of her soft movements reminded him that he was no longer alone. A strange warmth settled in his chest, the kind that comes from responsibility, from knowing that someone trusted you enough to rely on your kindness. The girl sat on the edge of the bed, her small hands folded neatly in her lap. She had washed her face in the basin of water he had left near her, and had smoothed her hair as best she could, though it still fell in loose, tangled strands around her face. She glanced at the blacksmith, who was tending the fire in the forge, and felt a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. She had never asked for help before, never relied on anyone in such a way. Yet here in this small town, in this modest workshop, she had found a moment of safety. "Do you sleep well?" the blacksmith asked gently, not looking at her but at the glowing embers of the forge. His voice was calm, but carried a weight of curiosity, of concern. The girl hesitated, her eyes flicking to his face, then back to the floor. I slept," she said softly, her voice carrying a quiet strength that belied her fragile appearance. "It was safe." The blacksmith nodded. He had expected fear, restlessness, perhaps even mistrust. But she seemed different, cautious, yes, but grateful. He offered her a small, reassuring smile. "Good," he said. "That is all that matters tonight." After a moment of silence, she asked quietly, Why are you helping me?" Her voice was almost a whisper, but the question carried the weight of someone who had been let down too many times before. The blacksmith stopped what he was doing, placing the tongs on the edge of the forge. He turned to face her, his eyes soft but steady. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply. "No one should have to sleep outside when there is a warm place inside." The girl looked down at her hands, unsure what to say. She had expected suspicion, maybe even anger, but not kindness. She wanted to ask more, to understand him, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she nodded slightly, a small gesture that spoke volumes. Breakfast followed soon after. The blacksmith had prepared simple food, bread, cheese, and a cup of warm milk. He set it on a small table near the fire and motioned for her to sit. She ate quietly, her movements careful, almost shy. He watched her, noting how she savored each bite, how she seemed almost unfamiliar with such kindness. The morning passed in a comfortable silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the occasional sound of the blacksmith's hammer shaping metal. Once breakfast was finished, the blacksmith decided to let her help around the workshop. It was small work at first, sweeping the floor, fetching water, and organizing tools, but she approached it with diligence. Every movement was careful, deliberate. She did not speak much, but her presence was comforting. The blacksmith, who had grown used to long hours of solitude, found himself talking more than usual. "You know," he said, wiping his hands on a rag, "a good blacksmith can tell a lot about a person by the way they work. You have to be patient, careful, and steady. If you rush, the metal will bend, break, or burn." The girl nodded, her eyes curious. "Like life?" she asked, her voice hesitant. The blacksmith chuckled softly, a sound rarely heard outside of his shop. "Yes," he said. "Life is like metal. If you handle it too roughly, it can hurt you. If you are careful, patient, and steady, you can shape it into something strong and lasting." Her gaze lingered on him, as if trying to understand. She had seen much in her short life: fear, loss, the constant uncertainty of being on the move. But here, in the quiet workshop, the blacksmith's words seemed to make sense. It was a lesson she had never learned from others. Here, someone cared enough to teach her not only skills but patience, not only survival but understanding. Hours passed. The sun climbed high into the sky, casting its bright light across the town. Occasionally, townspeople stopped by, curious about the girl who had appeared at the blacksmith's doorstep. Some whispered, some stared, but none dared enter. The blacksmith did not mind. He had seen enough of the world to know that fear often comes from misunderstanding. He also knew that trust could grow slowly, like a flame protected from the wind. As the day moved on, the blacksmith finally asked her story. She hesitated, then began slowly, choosing her words with care. She spoke of her home, far away in the hills and valleys where the rivers ran clear and the land was green and full of life. She spoke of family, of traditions, and of the sudden violence that had forced her to leave. She did not exaggerate, did not dramatize. She simply told what had happened, and as she spoke, the blacksmith listened, realizing the courage it took for someone so young to survive so much. "You have been through a lot," he said softly when she paused, her voice trembling slightly. "Most people would not make it this far," she shrugged, trying to appear strong. "I had to keep going," she said simply. I could not stay, it was not safe." The blacksmith nodded, feeling a quiet respect for her resilience. He thought about his own life, spent mostly in the predictable rhythm of the forge, never knowing such danger or fear. And yet, in this small workshop, their paths had crossed. And in this crossing, both of them were learning something about courage, about kindness, and about the unexpected ways life can bring people together. Evening came slowly. The light shifted to a softer, warmer glow, and the girl helped him clean the workshop. She moved with a quiet grace, careful to not disturb anything, careful to show respect for the work he had done all these years. The blacksmith noticed the subtle ways she learned, the way she observed before she acted, the way she asked questions quietly, thoughtfully. Finally, when the work was done, they sat together by the fire. The girl's eyes, which had seemed cautious and wary all day, softened. She looked at the blacksmith, her gaze meeting his with a mixture of gratitude and relief. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice steady now. "For letting me stay, for everything." The blacksmith nodded, a faint smile on his face. "You are welcome," he said. "Sometimes helping someone is all that matters, and tonight you will rest safely. That is enough." As night fell, the town grew quiet again. The stars appeared one by one in the dark sky, tiny lights shining across the vast wilderness. The girl lay in the small bed, her body finally relaxing after a long day. She closed her eyes, thinking about the forge, the blacksmith, and the warmth of this unexpected kindness. For the first time in many nights, she felt a sense of peace. The blacksmith, meanwhile, returned to the forge one last time. He worked slowly, letting the metal guide him, letting the rhythm of his hammering soothe his mind. In the quiet, he realized that his life had changed too. In giving shelter, in showing trust and compassion, he had discovered something he did not expect. A connection that went beyond words, a moment of shared humanity that would remain long after the fire had burned out. Outside, the world continued as it always had. Winds whispered through the trees, distant animals stirred in the night, and the town rested beneath the stars. But inside the small workshop, two lives had intersected, forming a bond that neither of them would forget. In that simple act of shelter, in that quiet moment of trust, both had found something precious: hope. The days passed quietly in the small frontier town, but for the girl and the blacksmith, each one carried a subtle change. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the workshop, lighting the corners where dust motes danced in the air. The girl had begun to move with more confidence, though still cautious, as if afraid the world might suddenly change and force her to leave. The blacksmith, too, noticed a difference in himself. He found he looked forward to her presence, to the sound of her soft footsteps and the small questions she would ask about the work he was doing. One morning he was shaping a new horseshoe when she appeared at the door, holding a small broom. She nodded to him shyly, then started sweeping the floor near the forge. The blacksmith glanced at her, his hands pausing for a moment. "You are learning quickly," he said. "That is good. A tidy workshop makes work easier and it teaches patience." The girl looked up at him, her eyes curious. "Patience?" she asked, tilting her head. He smiled faintly. "Yes, in life as in metalwork, patience matters. If you rush, mistakes happen. If you take your time, you make something strong." She thought about his words as she continued sweeping. It was strange to hear someone speak like this, not scolding or ordering her, but explaining, teaching, guiding. She had spent so much of her life on the run, moving from place to place, always looking over her shoulder. The idea that someone could show her patience, even kindness, was almost unbelievable. After she finished, the blacksmith handed her a small task. "Bring me the water from the barrel outside. Be careful, don't spill it." She nodded and carried the bucket slowly, feeling the weight in her small hands. She thought of how far she had come to reach this town, to reach this workshop. Every step had been uncertain, dangerous, and exhausting. Yet now, carrying water for the blacksmith, she felt useful, as if her presence mattered. When she returned, he nodded approvingly. "See, you did it well. Little by little, you will learn everything here." The day unfolded in this quiet rhythm, the girl helping around the workshop and the blacksmith explaining small parts of his work. She learned to hold the hammer, to steady her hands, and to watch the metal glow before striking it. Her small movements were careful but deliberate, her eyes focused, and the blacksmith noticed her determination. It reminded him of someone learning a skill for survival, a skill that would matter beyond the walls of the workshop. By midday, she had grown brave enough to ask questions about him. "Do you have family?" she asked, breaking the silence that had stretched over the morning. The blacksmith paused, setting down his tools. He looked at her, considering how much to reveal. "No," he said finally. "I lost my family long ago. My parents died when I was young, and I have lived alone for many years. But this workshop, it is my life, my home." The girl nodded slowly, understanding more than words could say. She had known loss too, had seen loved ones disappear, had learned to survive on her own. And yet here, in this quiet workshop, she was learning something she had not known before: connection, trust, the comfort of someone who did not abandon you. Afternoon came and the blacksmith decided to take a break. He sat on a small wooden bench outside, wiping his brow with a cloth. The girl joined him, sitting on the edge of the step, her small hands folded neatly in her lap. For a long while they said nothing, watching the sun shift slowly across the sky. The wind brought the scent of wildflowers from the hills, and the quiet of the town surrounded them. Finally, the girl spoke. "Do you ever get lonely?" Her voice was soft, hesitant. The blacksmith looked at her, his eyes thoughtful. "Yes," he said. "I have been alone for many years. The work keeps me busy, but at night, yes, loneliness comes. That is why it is nice to have company, even if it is someone quiet like you." She felt warmth spread through her chest. It was strange, this feeling of being wanted, of being seen not as a stranger but as a person. She had spent so long hiding, surviving alone, that the idea of belonging, even for a short time, felt almost magical. Over the next few days, the girl began to open up more. She shared small stories of her life before the journey, how she used to watch the river, how she learned to track animals, and how she helped her family gather food. Her words were simple, but the blacksmith listened carefully, fascinated by the life she had lived. He had grown up in the town, his life predictable, but hers had been full of adventure, challenge, and courage. He admired her quietly, though he never said it aloud. She in turn began to ask about him. "Did you always want to be a blacksmith?" she asked one afternoon as he hammered a piece of iron. He paused, smiling faintly. "I did," he said. "When I was a boy, I watched the smith work and I wanted to make things with my hands. I liked the way metal could change from hard and cold to something useful and strong. It feels like creating life in a way." The girl nodded, her dark eyes shining with curiosity. I like making things too," she said softly. "Not metal, but small things. I like learning." The blacksmith's smile deepened. "Then you are like me. Learning is the most important thing, and you are learning quickly." As days turned into weeks, their bond grew stronger. She helped more confidently around the workshop, fetching tools, cleaning, and even holding the horseshoes in place while he worked. He guided her patiently, correcting gently when mistakes were made, encouraging when she succeeded. And slowly, a rhythm formed between them: trust, understanding, and quiet companionship. One evening, as the sun sank behind the distant hills, the blacksmith handed her a small hammer. "Try this," he said. "Strike gently, feel the metal, do not rush." She gripped the hammer tightly, her small hands trembling slightly. The first strike was awkward, the metal bouncing under her blow. But the blacksmith guided her hand, showing her how to steady her arm and focus on the rhythm. Slowly, strike by strike, she began to feel the metal bend under her control. A small smile appeared on her face, a mixture of pride and excitement. "You did it," the blacksmith exclaimed quietly. "See, you are learning, you are strong enough." Her eyes widened. I did it," she asked, hardly believing it. "Yes," he said. "Little by little you will learn more, and one day you may even teach someone else." That night she lay in the small bed, her hands still tingling from the work she had done. She thought about the blacksmith, the workshop, the quiet rhythm of their days together. She realized she was no longer just surviving. She was learning, growing, and feeling something she had never felt before: hope. The blacksmith, meanwhile, sat by the dying fire, reflecting on the days that had passed. He had always lived a quiet, predictable life, but her presence had brought something unexpected: a connection, a purpose beyond the rhythm of the forge. He realized that kindness, patience, and understanding could shape not only metal, but people too. Outside, the night settled softly over the town. The stars twinkled above, a reminder of the vast world beyond the hills. But inside the workshop, the blacksmith and the girl had created a small world of trust, learning, and quiet companionship. In each other they had found strength. In each other they had found hope. And as the fire crackled its final sparks, both felt a small, comforting certainty that even in a world full of uncertainty and fear, connections could be formed and kindness could endure. The girl had learned that there could be safety, guidance, and care in unexpected places. The blacksmith had learned that compassion could bring new meaning to life, even for someone who thought he had seen and experienced everything. Together, they continued their quiet days, working, learning, and growing in ways neither had imagined possible. And though neither knew what tomorrow would bring, they both understood that in this small workshop, in this small town, they had found something rare and precious: trust. The days had grown longer and warmer, and the small town began to hum with the quiet rhythm of daily life. Children ran barefoot along the dirt roads, merchants shouted softly as they sold their goods, and the blacksmith's workshop rang with the familiar sound of hammer against metal. The girl had settled into a routine, helping with chores, learning to work with the blacksmith, and slowly becoming part of the rhythm of his small life. She was no longer the frightened traveler who had appeared at his door weeks ago. She moved with purpose, her hands steady, her eyes curious, and her spirit quietly growing stronger. But the town, though seemingly peaceful, was not without its shadows. Rumors began to spread, whispers about the girl who had appeared unannounced at the blacksmith's home. Some townspeople were wary, others suspicious. They had heard stories about travelers, about danger, and about people from faraway lands. Some feared the girl might bring trouble, even though she had done nothing to harm anyone. Yet in a small town like this, fear was often louder than reason. One afternoon, as the blacksmith worked on a wagon wheel, he noticed a group of townsmen gathered near the edge of his yard. Their voices carried clearly over the rhythmic pounding of the forge. The girl, who had been sweeping nearby, froze when she saw them. Her dark eyes widened, and she instinctively stepped back toward the safety of the workshop. The leader of the group, a burly man with a stern face, stepped forward. "We've heard about this girl," he said, his voice low but firm. "She doesn't belong here. You shouldn't be sheltering her. People might talk and trouble could follow." The blacksmith set down his hammer, his heart tightening. He had expected suspicion, but he had not anticipated confrontation so openly. He wiped his hands on his rag and faced the group, his posture calm but firm. "She has done nothing wrong," he said. "She needed shelter and I gave it. That is all." The burly man frowned, his arms crossing over his chest. "It doesn't matter what she's done. You know how townspeople are. Fear spreads. People will gossip. This could bring trouble to all of us." The girl, standing quietly behind the blacksmith, felt a mixture of fear and shame. She had hoped her presence would go unnoticed, that she could remain a small, invisible part of the blacksmith's life. Now, for the first time since she had arrived, she felt the sting of being judged, of being seen as different and unwelcome. The blacksmith noticed her trembling, her small hands clenching at her sides. He stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Do not be afraid," he said softly. You are safe here, and I will not let anyone take that away from you." The townsmen exchanged uneasy glances. Some murmured under their breath, others shifted uncomfortably. The blacksmith's calm, steady presence seemed to hold them at bay. He continued, his voice firm but controlled. "I will not ask you to understand her. That is not important. What matters is that she is safe, and as long as she is here, I will protect her." A tense silence followed. The group seemed uncertain, caught between fear, suspicion, and respect for the blacksmith. Slowly, one by one, they muttered words of warning and finally dispersed, leaving the yard quiet once more. The girl let out a shaky breath, relief washing over her in gentle waves. She looked at the blacksmith, her eyes shining. "Thank you," she whispered. The blacksmith gave a small nod, a faint smile on his face. "No thanks needed," he said. "You have done nothing wrong, that is enough." As the evening approached, the girl stayed close to the workshop, helping with small tasks and moving carefully, aware that the eyes of the town could still be watching. The blacksmith noticed the tension in her shoulders and the way she avoided looking toward the houses across the street. He realized that, although the confrontation had ended for now, the fear lingered. He decided to speak with her, not as a teacher, but as someone who understood what it meant to feel alone in the world. "You did well today," he said, as they sat together near the fire, cleaning tools and preparing for the night. "It was not easy, but you stayed calm. That is strength, not weakness." The girl hesitated, looking down at the floor. I do not want to cause trouble," she said softly. "I just want to stay here to learn and help. I do not want anyone to be upset because of me." The blacksmith shook his head gently. "You are not causing trouble. Fear causes trouble, not you. People are quick to judge what they do not understand. But you are doing what you should, surviving, learning, growing." Her eyes met his, a mixture of gratitude and wonder in them. For the first time, she realized that someone truly saw her, not as a threat, not as an outsider, but as a person. She felt a small, quiet courage rising within her. Over the next days, they continued their work together, but the girl became more aware of the town's watchful eyes. Some neighbors avoided the blacksmith's yard, whispering to each other as they passed. The girl felt the tension, but also began to understand the importance of trust. The blacksmith had shown her that courage was not only about surviving danger in the wild, it was also about standing firm in the face of fear and prejudice. One afternoon, the blacksmith handed her a small project. "You will help me make a simple iron hook," he said. "It is small, but it requires care and patience." She took the piece of iron in her hands, her fingers brushing the cool metal. I will try," she said, a quiet determination in her voice. "Good," he said. "Do not rush. Watch the metal, feel it change as it heats. That is the lesson here." Strike by strike, guided by the blacksmith's hands and words, she learned to shape the metal carefully. Sweat ran down her face, and the muscles in her small arms ached, but she persisted. With each strike, she felt a growing confidence, not only in her ability to work with metal, but in her ability to face challenges. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, the girl paused in her work and looked at the blacksmith. I feel stronger," she said quietly. "Not just here, but inside. I feel like I can face the world." The blacksmith nodded, a sense of pride warming him. "That is because you are learning more than just metalwork. You are learning trust, patience, and courage, and those lessons will stay with you wherever you go." The town, for all its whispers and fear, could not diminish the bond that had formed in the small workshop. The blacksmith had stood firm, protecting the girl not just from danger, but from the fear and judgment of others. And in return, the girl had begun to grow into her own strength, finding courage she had not known she possessed. One evening, as they cleaned the last tools and prepared to rest, a soft breeze blew through the open door, carrying the scent of wildflowers from the hills. The girl paused, closing her eyes for a moment, and allowed herself to feel peace. She thought of the journey that had brought her here, of the fear and uncertainty she had faced, and of the rare kindness that had offered her a place to belong, even temporarily. The blacksmith noticed her quiet reflection. He understood without words the depth of her journey. He had seen the transformation, the small steps of courage, the growing trust, the quiet resilience. And he knew that protecting her was not just about shelter or safety, but about helping her discover her own strength. Night fell, and the stars appeared one by one in the dark sky. The girl lay in the small bed, her body finally relaxing after the tension of the day. She closed her eyes, thinking of the blacksmith, the workshop, and the safety that had become her new reality. She understood, in a way she could not fully explain, that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to face it with trust and determination. The blacksmith, meanwhile, returned to the forge for a final check on the day's work. He struck the metal gently, letting the rhythmic sound soothe him. He reflected on the events of the day, the confrontation, the fear, the courage, and realized that standing firm, defending what was right, had strengthened him as much as it had strengthened her. Outside, the night settled softly over the town. The winds whispered through the trees, and the quiet streets were lit only by the stars and the faint glow of lamps in the homes. But inside the workshop, a small world of trust, learning, and quiet courage had been forged. The blacksmith had protected the girl from fear, and in doing so had helped her discover her own strength. Together, they had faced suspicion, fear, and the unknown. And though tomorrow might bring new challenges, both knew that they could face them, because they had learned the value of trust, patience, and courage, and they had found in each other a bond that fear could not break. In that small frontier town under the wide, starry sky, a young girl and a blacksmith had created something far more enduring than iron or metalwork. They had created a connection, a quiet, resilient bond built on trust, courage, and the simple, profound power of kindness. The days grew shorter and the air carried a faint chill as the season began to change. The small frontier town moved at its usual rhythm, yet inside the blacksmith's workshop, the rhythm of life had taken on a deeper meaning. The girl had become part of the quiet life of the forge, yet a sense of change lingered in the air. She had grown stronger, more confident and capable, but she knew deep down that her journey could not end here. She had found safety, trust, and kindness, but the world beyond the town still awaited her. The blacksmith noticed her quiet moments of reflection. She would pause while working, staring out of the small window at the hills beyond, lost in thought. Sometimes she would brush her hair back and take a deep breath as if preparing herself for something she had known was coming. He did not ask questions, for he understood that some things could not be rushed. She needed to decide for herself. One morning, as the sun rose in soft golden light, the girl approached him while he worked on a wagon wheel. Her voice was soft but steady. I think it is time for me to go," she said. The blacksmith paused, wiping the sweat from his brow with a rag. He looked at her, taking in her determined eyes and the quiet courage she carried. "Do you feel ready?" he asked gently. She nodded. "I have learned much here. You have taught me to be patient, to work carefully, and to trust. But I must continue. I cannot stay forever. My journey is not done." He swallowed hard, feeling a mixture of pride and sadness. He had grown fond of her presence, and the thought of her leaving tugged at his heart. Yet he understood. Life was a journey, and safety was only temporary. "Then you must go," he said softly. "But remember what you have learned here. Patience, courage, trust, they will serve you well." She stepped closer, placing her small hand on his arm. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. I will not forget you or this place. You saved me, and you showed me that kindness exists even when the world feels harsh." The blacksmith nodded, his eyes misty. "And you saved me too," he said quietly. "You reminded me that even a life of routine can change, that caring for someone else can bring its own rewards." Over the next few days, they prepared for her departure. The blacksmith packed a small bundle for her journey, a few clothes, some food for the road, and a small tool he had made himself. A simple iron pendant shaped like a horseshoe, a symbol of protection and strength. She accepted it with quiet gratitude, understanding the thought and care behind the gift. On her last morning in the workshop, the town seemed unusually still. The birds sang their morning songs, the wind whispered through the trees, and the dirt roads glimmered faintly with dew. The girl stood in the doorway, her small bundle in her hands, and looked back at the blacksmith one final time. "You will be safe," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Remember, courage is not the absence of fear. It is facing what you must, even when it is difficult. And kindness, never underestimate the power of kindness." She nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I will remember," she said softly. "I will try to be strong as you taught me, and I will help others when I can as you helped me." They walked together to the edge of the yard, and she turned to face him. "Will I ever see you again?" she asked, a small quiver in her voice. He shook his head, smiling faintly. "Perhaps not, but that does not matter. What matters is what you carry with you in your heart. You have learned well, and that is enough." With a deep breath, she stepped onto the road, her small figure moving steadily toward the hills beyond the town. She carried her bundle, her head held high, and her heart full of the lessons she had learned. She thought of the blacksmith, the warmth of the forge, and the quiet companionship they had shared. For the first time in her young life, she felt a sense of certainty, not about the future, but about her own strength and courage. As she walked, the blacksmith watched from the doorway, his hands resting on the wooden frame. He thought of the days they had spent together, the work, the quiet conversations, the trust that had grown between them. He realized that their time together had changed both of them in ways neither could have predicted. He had discovered patience and a deep sense of purpose, and she had discovered courage and the strength to face the unknown. The town resumed its normal rhythm, but the workshop felt different now. The fire burned steadily, the tools were arranged carefully, yet there was a quiet emptiness where the girl had once moved. The blacksmith worked diligently, as he always had, but he often paused to look at the small corner of the room she had occupied. Her presence had left a lasting mark, not only on the space but on his heart. Days turned into weeks, and the blacksmith continued his work, quietly remembering the lessons they had shared. He realized that kindness, courage, and trust were not just for fleeting moments, they were the foundation of a life well lived. He often thought of her, imagining her journey through the hills and forests, facing challenges with the courage they had nurtured together. The girl's journey was not easy. She walked through forests, crossed streams, and navigated open fields, sometimes alone, sometimes encountering travelers along the way. Yet every step she took, she carried the lessons of the blacksmith with her. She worked carefully, faced obstacles with patience, and trusted herself to make the right choices. And when she felt fear creeping in, she thought of the small forge, the rhythmic pounding of metal, and the quiet man who had shown her what kindness could mean. Months later, the blacksmith received word from a passing traveler. They spoke of a young girl who had helped a family in need, who had shared her skills and courage with those she met along the way. The blacksmith smiled quietly to himself. It was the life he had hoped for her, not a life of safety alone, but a life where she could use her strength and kindness to touch the lives of others. In the quiet of the evening, as the fire in the forge dimmed and the stars appeared in the dark sky, the blacksmith reflected on their time together. He thought of the girl's first hesitant steps into the workshop, her cautious voice asking for a place to sleep, and the journey that had brought them together. He realized that small acts of kindness could have profound effects, that courage could grow in the hearts of those who had been shown trust, and that human connection could leave a lasting mark, even in a short time. The girl, far away now, also reflected on her time in the town. She remembered the forge, the rhythmic pounding of the hammer, and the quiet lessons in patience, courage, and trust. She understood that her journey was far from over, but she also knew she carried something powerful with her. The knowledge that even in a harsh, uncertain world, kindness existed, and it could change lives. Years later, she would recall the blacksmith and the small workshop with warmth and gratitude. She would remember the lessons he had taught her, the safety he had provided, and the quiet strength she had discovered within herself. And the blacksmith, too, would carry her memory in his heart, a reminder that even in the routine of daily life, moments of courage, trust, and kindness could create lasting change. Their time together had been brief, yet its impact was enduring. The girl had learned to face the world with courage and patience, and the blacksmith had discovered the quiet joy of helping another soul grow. In that small frontier town, under the wide sky and amidst the quiet hills, two lives had intersected and changed each other forever. And though their paths would diverge, the bond they shared, built on trust, patience, and kindness, would remain, a silent, powerful thread connecting them across time and distance. The blacksmith returned to his forge one last time that evening, striking the metal with a steady, calm rhythm. Sparks flew, illuminating the workshop for a brief moment, and in that light he felt a quiet peace. The girl had found her strength. He had shared his kindness. And in that small act of connection, they had both discovered something lasting: the power of trust, courage, and human compassion.